Hey guys, welcome back to Ukrainian Couple, and there's no shortage of news coming out of Ukraine, and that means I gotta make more videos for you guys. Recently, the biggest clown in the world, and we all know who I'm referring to by this point, essentially grabbed 4 Ukrainian oblasts, like provinces essentially, and said that they're gonna be part of Russia right now. I hope you guys had a good laugh at that one as well. But aside from that, there are some pretty good news coming out of Ukraine. Ukraine grabbed a pretty well-defended strategic place called Liman in Donetsk Oblast, and it's pushing hard into Luhansk Oblast as we speak, and it's also pushing south into Kherson, and maybe by Monday we'll see something interesting coming out of it. But in this video I want to talk about a pretty horrible practice that's really just impossible for me to ignore, and we've all known that Russian forces have been essentially brutalizing and murdering civilians in record numbers several times all over the place. But like I said, there's an evil pattern that I just cannot ignore, and that's why I'm going to make this video. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring attention to this topic so that the world always remembers these horrific atrocities, and also as a way to document it all. I'm talking about this evil practice of shelling and machine gunning down civilian convoys full of men, women, and children that are helpless, that are trying to escape, that are trying to, get themselves to safety or get their loved ones to safety. From the very first week of the war in March, when Russia gained their positions in Hostomel and Bucha, Ukrainian security services have released CCTV footage where Russians shot at 12 cars over a period of 6 hours. But that's only what was documented, because in reality we don't really know how many days these savages were doing this, how long they were sitting there and picking off these poor people as they were driving by their location. It was basically a safari, something that they did for fun, according to one of the heads of Ukrainian national police force. He said that some cars had 178 bullet holes in them. And sometime a week later, and sometime in the middle of March, this was actually reported on by Wall Street Journal. They published a video investigation where Russians sprayed with bullets every single car that drove by on the road between a village called Motyzhin and Yagnohorodka. These were villages west of Kiev, from where we were staying temporarily while we were hiding from Russians. And this is basically as far as Russians got before they were driven out up north, essentially. And on Thursday, September 29th, Russians shelled a convoy of people leaving Zaporizhia. They were going south to the temporary occupied territories, and they wanted to get to their loved ones. 30 civilians were killed, including 6 children, and another 28 civilians were wounded. And just the next day, on Friday, September 30th, Russians riddled with bullet holes a number of cars in the village of Kryilivka, a short distance away from Kupiansk, again, a place that Russians have retreated from. And over there, as far as we know, 24 people lost their lives, a pregnant woman, and 13 children. When the Ukrainian media interviewed one woman, she said she was running away from her burning car, and her husband and son were in that car, and they did not survive. As she and other survivors ran away, she says the attackers wanted to finish them off to cover the tracks by killing the witnesses. According to her, 5 to 7 people survived, alleging that Russians fired at civilians at close range. So you guys see a pattern emerging here. The Russians are deliberately behaving like terrorists, proving once again that Russia is nothing but a terrorist state. I mean, I personally think that Russia is no different from ISIS, who exist only to terrorize their neighbors. Outside of it, there aren't really much use to them, and in the modern world, essentially. But what makes it really dangerous is that it's a terrorist state that has veto in the UN, and it's armed with the most nuclear weapons. And the fact is, for the majority of Ukrainians, it's a nightmare that never ends. Now, I want to lead this discussion into a question. After hearing all of this in the news, do we want to welcome Russians in Europe? Well, there's a guy that I admire, Maxim Katz, a Russian opposition politician. He obviously cares a lot about the interests of his own people. That is, the people that are right now staying at the borders of Georgia, Kazakhstan. They're trying to leave and flee Russia due to its mobilization and whatnot. As of right now, every single EU country, Finland, Estonia, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, well, any country that is bordering Russia at the moment, they have closed their borders to Russians, essentially. Finland was the last country to do that on October 1st, and to this day, this is what Maxim Katz has to say.
Today, the government of Finland decided to close their borders for people that are trying to flee Russia with Russian passports. I want to use this opportunity to ask the Finnish government to reconsider this decision. The lines on the border now is not tourists. These people that are trying to escape Russia and not want to be conscripted to the Russian army. These people don't want to be Putin's soldier in his war against Ukraine. The only thing they need is a transit possibility. The possibility to get to an airport and fly to Israel, to Montenegro, to Georgia, to other destinations that are ready to legally accept them. Finnish border is crucial for these purposes. Many people who won't be able to cross it in the following week or two will be conscripted and will be sent to the war.
I understand Maxim, and I understand that he wants the EU to be compassionate to the Russian people at this moment, at this difficult time for them. I mean, the Russians can rightly be handed a summons to appear at the military commissariat office to be drafted. These mobile military commissariat offices have appeared at protest areas, at the border regions, and therefore any Russian man that is in those areas is risk being taken to the army. He can even end up being one of those terrorists shooting at the women and children, right, trying to evacuate. So what do I say to that? I'm gonna ask another question, a follow-up question to that, and I want to ask, in hindsight, in retrospect, do we see Hitler, Goebbels, Göring and Himmler with compassion? I mean, we all know what the Japanese did during the Nonking massacre, what the Nazis did to the Jews in the Babin Yar, which I made a video about also, by the way. Do we treat those people that did these things with compassion? Of course we don't. For example, during the Nonking massacre, where more than 200,000, and this is just like a conservative estimate, of women, children were tortured, raped, machine gunned, and bayoneted to death. According to John Spence, an Australian journalist, he says, there's no obvious explanation for this grim event, nor can one be found at all. And why is that? Because the Japanese soldiers who had expected an easy victory in their conquest of China have instead been fighting hard for months, and they had to take out their anger at other people. That is why we've seen more casualties than anticipated. These soldiers were bored, angry, frustrated, and tired. And in Nazi Germany, we all know how a decade-long campaign of dehumanizing Jews did to the average Germans and made ordinary soldiers so eager to engage in atrocities. So does that sound familiar? Well, I gotta say one thing. I wish I could go back into the year 1938. I wish I could find a Chinese woman in Nanking and ask her if she wants to live next to a Japanese. I wish I could go back in time and talk to a Jew in Poland and ask him whether or not he wants to live next to a German. Like, what we have to understand is that the EU already has a massive influx of Ukrainians, has a huge Ukrainian population. And these countries do not want to make Ukrainians, refugees, any more uncomfortable. They don't want them to feel traumatized and scared for their lives. In fact, Dmytro Kuleba, Ukrainian foreign minister, explicitly said that blocking Russians into Finland and Poland and Baltic states essentially was a huge diplomatic effort on the behalf of Ukrainians. I mean, he says the whole point of blocking Russians from the EU, after all, is to just not get Russians into Europe. It's the fact that Russians are dangerous, they pose a threat, and since the majority of Russians actually get across the land border, they don't fly out, right? Because driving across the border is cheaper. That's a huge amount of people are gonna go into Europe. I mean, that was just like a first step for Ukrainians, in many, to just like ban the existence of the Schengen visa for Russians.
The entry ban for Russians is the most effective personal sanction. No need to tell that not all Russians are to blame. The absolute majority of Russians support aggression against Ukraine, war crimes and murders, and the seizure of foreign land. Therefore, it is quite logical to deprive them of the right to cross international border until they learn to respect them. We also do not accept the argument that such a move would limit the possibility of leaving for those who do not support the Putin regime. There will always be the possibility of political asylum for people who are persecuted. But Russian tourists wearing USSR t-shirts, letters Z and other like them should not hang around foreign beaches, sites, shops, restaurants while their country is waging a bloody war of aggression in Europe.
I mean, after all, if Russia just completely throws out the window and discards international law, year-long agreements, painstaking treaties, long-lasting deals with other neighbors, then we should crumple up every single agreement we've ever had with Russia and throw it in the trash as well. Which means that we have to start all over again. Let's start with a clean sheet of paper, start brand new. That means it should be no Schengen visa for Russians. There should be a new agreement that we can come up with and start something new. Like, let's say, without Russia in the UN, without Russia in the WTO, nothing. Let's just come up with a new agreement with Russia. We have to come up with a new way of talking to each other, right? This is basically what I'm trying to say. I mean, after all, the Russians that yesterday have put a Z swastika on their cars and supported the war have just flipped right now, and they stand for peace. I mean, that's why we should have no compassion for the Russians. I mean, in the end, like, do we see the SS units who wiped out whole towns of France and Belgium, who shot and buried tens of thousands of people in the woods, in the Babi Yar massacre, in countless other massacres that have been perpetuated against the people of other countries? No, we don't see any compassion. But these people did live in a different world. Today we have the internet, today we have collaboration, today we have cooperation, and now more than ever, people care about peace. People are ultimately now way more responsible for their actions than they have been in the past. Russians had a chance to leave all this 6 months. They've had a chance to stand for peace, but they chose not to. So should we feel compassionate for them? I don't know. It's up to you to decide, I guess, too, right? So I'll leave it at that, guys. Thanks for watching, Ukrainian Couple, and I'll see you guys next time.